Advanced Media. Welcome back to the Rutgers Rant, a special emergency edition of the Rutgers Rant.
Whoa. Don't we need like a 48-hour public notice in order to have
Yeah, I submitted it. Yeah, there's actually 6 guys here waiting to talk in my kitchen. We got 2 Rutgers professors. Charlie's here.
Well, it's fitting that we're doing this via teleconference, right?
Yeah, I told them they had 2 minutes, and if not, my dog was going to attack them. That seems fair, right? That's how isn't that how it works?
Perfectly fair.
The security guards would drag them out of my house and kick them onto the front porch. What a day yesterday, guys! I mean, we certainly wrote about 153 stories on it, but just waiting for this press conference to happen over the last 2 months, it was, I have to say, everything I expected and more. Was the performance I knew Greg Schiano was going to give, the rallying cry to New Jersey, the olive branch to Pat Hobbs, the governor. I mean, there's a lot of things that to unfold over that couple hours. Sarge, I think you probably expected what you saw too. Cratch, I'm just based on your reaction, though. I think that it was maybe more than you thought you were going to get. I mean, is that an accurate assessment based on what the look on your face when Greg got done with that thing yesterday?
Yes, the only press conference I think I've ever been to in terms of not like a shocking news story or anything that was in my mind as remarkable was, and you were there, Steve, Tom Coughlin's defiant farewell press conference when he left the Giants, and I think when Greg broke into his monologue, his message to New Jersey, that was right up there when Tom said goodbye to a sobbing Eli Manning.
Yes.
that was a moment. As I tweeted, Rutgers, look, I say this, I don't think I'm not saying they're going to win the Big Ten, they're going to win a national title. They're a real college football program now with a real head football coach who in 20 minutes did more to sell Rutgers and New Jersey and have vision than Chris Ash ever did in 4 years.
So true.
I mean, no, seriously, here's the thing. Someone once told me about Chris. Nothing was ever good enough for Chris. He never complimented what Rutgers has done. And here's Greg look how beautiful College Ave is. I mean,
I know.
You never got that, And the biggest thing is we went from a guy who wouldn't even, he did everything he could to not set a standard that involved wins and losses to a guy who's talking about a national championship.
Right. Yeah. And that's really it, Chris. You nailed it because it was there were so many opportunities that it could have been negative on the process. He was asked about Chris Christie, and I think we were like, oh, here we go. This is the moment. He gave an olive branch. The man gave an olive branch to Chris Christie. I mean, you could have gotten more support if you said, you know what? The hell with that guy. Everyone would have roared. But no, that wasn't even something he was willing to do. He was like, yeah, no, it's real. Chris and Chris and I are okay. I mean, yeah, come on, Greg. The guy wrongly questioned your contractual demand for a private jet. I mean, it was just kind of amazing how he kept it positive. The Hobbs thing, too, Sarge. I mean, that was pretty telling the way they walked into the room. I know a lot of it is a show, and there's got to be some still hard feelings behind the scenes. But it was a good show. I'll give him that.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to, and kind of what we reported before the fact is they're going to try to make it work. And this is it starts with the Board of Governors, and it continues with Robert Barchi, the president, who does not want to fire Pat Hobbs. That's evident by a statement this week when the faculty council they passed a resolution to call for Pat Hobbs to be fired, and Barchi is standing by him. They are clearly going to try to make this work. And how do you make this work? The only way to do it is if Greg Schiano and Pat Hobbs are publicly standing, quote, shoulder to shoulder. That's the only way it's going to work. And you nailed it. I mean, that one moment in the press conference where there was a pause and you didn't know where he was going to go, you didn't know exactly what he was going to say. It was a moment. And they're going forward. Time will tell whether or not it will work. I think Pat Hobbs is going to try to do what he does best, and that's fundraise. And Greg Schiano is going to try to do what he does best and bring in players. And by the same token, we've already heard some of the stories of people wanting to give huge 7-figure gifts to Greg, and we'll see what it all adds up to.
That's a fascinating point. And Kratz, you wrote about this morning the vision for what the facilities are going to be, and you talk about that for a second. But as I'm writing the column yesterday, it just struck me that the thing that would really hammer it home is if they've got that $75 million that they need to start this thing before the Monmouth game next year. And I know when you say something like that around Rutgers, you're like, oh my God, it'll take like a decade and a half to do that. It really shouldn't. I mean, it's like if you get a couple of big donors, if there's a $20 million donation out there floating around, I mean, you've got some people who can throw money behind this thing. That to me would be the message that says, okay, these two can work together. So James, when I heard you asking the question to Pat Hobbs about what he wants that to be, what is the process now for the facilities?
Yeah, so basically they're going to, Pat said they are already in the process or about to start the process of interviewing architectural firms, kind of who wants to compete for the bid. Pat said he expects to award the bid for the master planning no later than beginning of 2020.
Right.
The one thing that's in the contract, fans may have noticed, is that Rutgers is committed to getting a cost projection and renderings immediately, so conceptual designs. So then that would allow Pat and Greg to take those renderings out to recruit off of for Greg, and for both of them to fundraise off of. And the minute they raise privately half of the projected cost of whatever project they settle on, Rutgers has committed to, basically get the wheels in motion with the finance committee and the facilities committee of the board of governors and figure out how they're going to pay off the rest and the debt structure and everything. So basically the minute Greg and Pat raise half the money, the shovels are going in the ground.
Right.
And you're right. If it gets done for the Monmouth game, I would think you could see them potentially, I don't know all the particulars, but they're a very aggressive construction schedule for the Rodkin Center as we speak. I don't see why they wouldn't have the same thing for football. And the other thing that the contract basically indicates, memorandum of agreement indicates that it would be in a new football headquarters with an adjoining practice facility. Now, I asked Pat, I said, is that a definite, or are you still open to the idea of a field house and then a separate second, football headquarters, which is, as I wrote, like that was the plan. Rutgers always planned to replace the bubble with a field house. They just thought once everybody else was out of the Hale Center, they would spruce it up and be good enough. Greg said, no, the Hale Center doesn't work for me. So I think now going forward, it'll likely be one gigantic football Death Star facility. But I think that it's also a possibility that depending on what the architects say, they could go to a situation where it's a team headquarters and a separate field house.
Just to kind of piggyback off of, and then Kratz, you nailed it. Your reporting on this is spot on, and you've been at the forefront of it since the beginning. But we could be looking in 5 years at like a totally different landscape.
Yeah.
And that includes the stadium because as we know, there's some facility, some upgrades that they need to do inside there. And Greg Schiano once told you, right, Steve, that his vision ultimately would be a second deck all the way around the entire stadium. They're going to want to take the press box and turn that into luxury suites for on the other side. Who knows where we get moved to? Greg Schiano's plan might have us, be moved to like
Denellen.
Denellen or Boundbrook.
Why is Denellen the funny town I always pull out from Middlesex County? There's got to be another funny name town I can come. It's Denellen for some reason.
Keep in mind. I mean, underneath the south end zone, at some point they're going to need to put. I know there's a plan in place already to make those the game day locker rooms. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different things that they have in the works. So, within the next 5 years, if we're still doing this podcast, we're going to be probably talking about a drastically different landscape of Rutgers football.
If we're still doing this podcast in 5 years.
I mean, when? Let's be honest, when we're doing this
podcast. That's I've lost my place in the script here. There were a lot of moments from this thing that I really enjoyed. I'm going to ask you guys if there's anything that stuck out for you, but my favorite was Greg Schiano telling the story of sneaking into New Jersey just at this time when everyone in the state was wondering what he was doing. I talked to his wife about this, and I guess she gave him his Amherst baseball cap and mate, you got to put this on. But that wasn't enough. Then says to him, but look, you can't smile, because if you smile, people will see your teeth and they'll know it's you. So here he is sulking through Newark Airport with this hat on, trying to get to the rental car, and then driving around New Brunswick and just seeing everything as we just talked about, and as Todrick Hunt just wrote a great story on this morning. What I found out at the end of this, and this is great, Rutgers fans are going to love this. So what does he do? He drops off his wife at this party. They all go out and they have, I guess they're a bunch of friends for his wife that she wanted to meet up with for something. And so he had the rest of the night to himself. And so he calls Eric LeGrand and he's just chatting with Eric. And in the course of this conversation, he says to Eric, hey, what's your address again anyway? And so Eric gives him the address thinking he's going to send him something. But instead, Schiano drives to Eric LeGrand's house and just rings the doorbell completely unexpected and goes in there and sits on the couch. So now, why is this relevant? It's relevant, of course, because that's just him. And that's, perfect Greg Schiano thing. But also, when this thing fell apart, who was the person saying, you can't tell me that this man does not want the job? It was Eric LeGrand. In the most forceful way, right? I mean, he was the guy, I think he changed. You said it last week, Kratz, he was the guy who changed this for a lot of people, because when he wrote that column that was on the front page of the paper, I mean, how do you lose Eric LeGrand? What's going on? It was just, to me, it was just an amazing thing that, to hear him telling this story and then to hear what he did when it was over. It's just kind of fun. Do you guys have, Sarge, you have something in the press conference that stuck out to you that jumped out that,
Probably the chop, and when he stepped away from the podium and is simulating the chop. And you remember, Steve, like the day after the Louisville game, and we had spent all that season, writing about it and like hearing about the chop and getting tired of it. And it's week 9, week 10, and and he explained like the origin. That was the first time he actually explained it. So now we flash forward 13 years, and it's back, and he's explaining it to a whole new legion of Rutgers fans, and like he's really just getting into it during the press conference. That was probably the thing that kind of stands out to me, just him simulating cutting down a tree.
Yeah, well, then he made the tree noise falling down.
Yeah, exactly.
There was more action in that 2 seconds than there was in Chris Ash's introductory press conference. I mean, right there, just doing that. Kratz, you have anything that stuck out to you that was funny?
It's not. We weren't at the little meet and greet after. They did not let the media in, but we talked to so many people who were in there. It just. I texted to our subscribers. One person told me it was like Jesus Christ and Bruce Springsteen walked into the room. Another person told me it was like the President of the United States was there, like going through the receiving line at the State of the Union. You may have seen video like. You've got the New Brunswick police, the Rutgers security guy, like Marco Battaglia is the body man, and he's working his way down the line, and people just want to touch him.
It's amazing.
They just want to reach out, and touch him. Right. And, one guy told me that, like, all these old timers, are coming up, and Greg remembers their names and asking how their kids are. And it was just, that's why I think they're going to get the money for the facilities by Monmouth, because there were so many people in that room. I heard, the club was as packed as it's ever been, that just walked out of there on cloud 97, and they're just ready to open up their wallets and their checkbooks.
That's incredible. I had a couple of them. I'll even name drop them. Tom Moran and Jim Kern, just the longtime fans, and walking out to the press conference, and literally just jump out of their car to talk to me about what had happened. And you could see it. You could see it on their faces. And Tom says to me that he's been a Rutgers guy. He's a CEO. He's an influential dude. And he just decided that he was going to die on this hill for Greg Schiano. And the way he said it was just like, I believed him. He sent me the letter he sent to the bar chief. He sent me just how furious he was when it was falling apart. And these are the people who matter, Sarge, right? I mean, this is why this whole thing made so much sense. He was the only person who, this doesn't happen with Butch Jones. I mean, it's blatantly obvious that he's the only person that brings all these people together because they know him and they have these relationships and they saw what he did the first time and they believe in him, right? I mean, that's the whole power of this thing.
Oh, you mentioned Jim Curran, and he was actually one of the 3 people who was quoted in that article the day after, or it might have actually been the same day that the
I forgot that. Yeah.
And it was Doug Dolan, who's a chief fundraiser for a long time, and Pete Hendricks, who's an influential attorney and like just a diehard Rutgers fan. And Ryan Hart, I think, was quoted in that story as well. But that story moved the needle more than a lot, in my opinion.
Yep.
Because it actually gave a lot of people the courage to to speak and send letters, and then I know our emails were inundated with letters that were we were CC'd on stuff that was sent directly to Pat Hobbs and the board and President Barchi. So that story right there kind of moved the needle, but. You're right. I mean, the amount of passion, we talked about last week, but it is going to be the story that will, if this does work, that is going to be told, 20 years from now that the fans made it happen.
All right, now let's dive into the nitty gritty here. Into coaching staff, and that was a funny moment after the press conference when I think it was you, Cratch, asking him about it. It was like, well, right now it's just me and Nuns. So the only two coaches currently on the staff, him and Nunzio. It's obviously going to change. What's your sense in reporting this now as to how quickly we're going to get some names here? He's got to fill it. I know he's not going to get it all filled by the signing day. It's only 8 days away. But what's going to happen now?
Well, there's one other guy. I talked to some people who said Colby Smith, the running backs coach, he's still with the program. He hasn't been formally retained. Okay. It seems like nothing's guaranteed for him more than like being here for the transition.
Why him? Have anybody? Why him? Just curious.
I think he recruits Florida well.
Right? Is that what it is?
Florida well. The players really respect him and like him. I think.
And he also played in that Louisville game in 2006.
I think Greg heard good things about him, so I think it's a situation where if he really kills it, maybe there's a spot for him on staff, depending on who Greg can get. If there's not a spot, I think at the very least he's a young coach who goes out there and into the job market with Greg's reference and blessing. So he's still there. I mean, for right now, it's the young the support staff guys. Rick Mance, my understanding, is still here. I expect him to be here going forward, I would assume.
Yeah.
But I think he's a guy who now is able to go on the road and recruit a little bit. I think it remains to be seen. Greg wasn't 100% kind of tipping his hand as to how much he's going to focus on recruiting high schoolers opposed to transfer portal guys early on. I don't expect, with the early signing period, most coaches now stick with their programs, get through the early signing period, then some coaches change jobs, and then some guys stick all the way through the traditional signing period in February. So I don't think Greg is going to have a whole intact, full coaching staff until February after the second signing period. But I would expect he probably gets some guys in after the first signing day, which is December 18th, so coming right up. And maybe some guys before then, but I would think it's going to take a little while for him to get the full staff in place.
I was interested in you had asked him. It was the one I thought we were going to get through the press conference without asking the question about the offense, and it was you got the mic at the end and asked him about the last question. He wouldn't answer it really, but he did kind of hint that he's going to try to spread the field and use a lot of the stuff that makes sense for there's a different philosophy than maybe his first time around. Sarge, what do you think? I mean, what would you take away as who would be a good fit for that? And have you heard any other names that might pop given what you know?
Yeah, I do think that Nunzio will be allowed to stay on the staff if he wants to. That was evident by the praise that Greg Schiano had for him. I do not think that he'll be the offensive coordinator. I do think that we've heard some names, whether it was Gleason, former Sean Gleason, who was formerly at Princeton, now he's at Oklahoma State. I think he could be involved. I think ultimately it's going to, like you mentioned, the New England Patriots system, in which 1 week they run the ball 52 times, only throw it 14 times, and then the next week it's the opposite. So he wants to go week to week and have people guessing. Who knows? If you mention the New England Patriots, maybe there's someone from that Belichick coaching tree that we don't know. So maybe that was a little bit of a hint.
Yeah, he does right. We forget about that. We don't, he's got a whole another set of relationships over the last 9 years that, the people from Ohio State, people from the pros. Yeah, there could be a lot of different direction he goes.
One thing I will
go ahead, Cratch.
is that I was told by someone who has knowledge, he had a very, very positive conversation with Art Sikowski before I decided to pull his name out of the transfer portal. And I know, I think it's going to be a spread, but from what I understand, a guy like Art in his skill set is going to fit in what Greg wants to do.
Okay.
It was not just like a, hey, thanks for staying around thing. It seems that Greg was, positive with Art about how he's going to fit in what Greg wants to do. So I do think that it's going to be a scheme that sort of a drop back passer like Art can operate.
I will say, I hope there is a movement to find a more mobile quarterback. I really, and I think that's been one of the few things over the last, 6 games with Johnny Langan. It just, there is, when you see someone who can run the ball, it'd be nice if you had someone who could also throw the ball and spread the field, obviously. But, I have to figure that's going to be a priority, finding that quarterback, but he's got to find everything. That's the whole thing. Like as giddy as, this day was, when you look at the roster, it's still, so we've got so many going. We'll dive into the Rutgers Insider questions in a minute, but one of them's like, I shudder to think of what this offensive line is going to look like next year. There's a lot of things that he's got to solve. Is it your sense, Crash, that this is going to be a heavy transfer portal deal, or, just in the short term? Is that where he's going to make this fix, or are there fixes out there, junior college or just through the freshman class?
I think it's probably going to be pretty transfer portal heavy, but the feeling is like there's not a lot of, the supply of offensive linemen in the portal or junior college plug and play guys is not meeting the demand.
Right.
So I think look last year, like, not to keep hammering the prior regime, but they went into the offseason knowing that they had to get an offensive lineman that could plug and play.
Right.
And they got a guy, junior college guy, who didn't play a meaningful snap the entire year.
Yeah.
So I think Greg's going to do better than Chris Ash did, but it's not like Greg's going to get 5 blocks of granite to put up, or 4 to go with Maietti. He's got some pieces: Raekwon O'Neal, Reggie Sutton, Mike Maietti coming back. Nick Crimmon, I believe, is coming back. Is coming back as well. So, but they need to get more guys in there. They need to get more competition. I just think that it's going to probably be rough at first because you just can't replace every spot in one off season.
Right. All right. And this is the perfect transition into the Rutgers Insider questions, which has been great, guys. I really, the subscriber base has gone up enormously because of this. I hope you'll stick with us because clearly there's a bunch of news yet to come in football. And then, we're going to be wrestling and basketball and the whole thing. It's going to be all winter is going to be busy, but NJ.com/text, as you know. All right. So on the transfer portal, and the question was, compared to 20 years ago, with the portal and the Big Ten and Greg's sudden rock star image, do you think he's going to be a bigger destination for recruits? And this is sort of a fascinating thing because I was talking to someone about it, and I wonder, just with a little bit of caution here, if it's a lot of people my age and Sarge's age who remember what he did here and have a better idea of, name recognition. High school coaches certainly. Is that going to resonate with recruits, you think, Sarge? Or are we looking at this from, a middle-aged set of eyes here that's not going to necessarily translate with teenagers?
I think it's going to resonate with high school coaches. And there are some people who think that, it's overstated that high school coaches have that much of an influence on where a recruit goes. Todrick would probably know a little bit better, but I think it depends on the high school coach and, on the relationship that he has with the kid. I think the high school coaches will all, Greg Schiano, his time will be remembered. As far it probably speaks to, I think Todrick quoted a kid. I did see a text in which a kid said that he didn't know a whole lot about Greg Schiano, but the one thing that you have to understand is, I covered it back in 2000, December 2000 and early January of 2001, when he was first starting out, that first recruiting class. He was, unlike any time that we had ever saw to that point and any time since, he was able to get so many of those high school recruits that were some of the best and to at least consider Rutgers. He by doing all these 200 or 300 recruits coming out to the Hale Center. You remember Ricky Cook? I think you might have mentioned him. he was the state's best prospect at the time. Like it was like unlike anything that we've ever seen. I expect to see that once again. He mentioned like toward the end of his tenure, like if you remember the recruiting class that was that he left right before he going to Tampa, that had Darius Hamilton and Leonte Carew, and that might be the best recruiting class in Rutgers history. So he's going to try to continue that. He's obviously while he was at Ohio State, you have to also remember he was 1 year voted the best recruiter in the country for among assistant coaches, and I think the next year I think he was recruited ranked in the top 5 according to I think it was 247 Sports. So this is the guy who knows how to recruit. This is the guy who's going to try to get players. It also, we should say, we saw a video on our vision that right after the press conference, I think he did a couple of radio interviews. I think he did something on BTN, but he was in the helicopter going out to recruit. So this is a guy who was, is clearly this is going to be his priority from day one and going forward.
In the helicopter, it's just I just love it. Where was he going? Do we have any idea? No. Flying off.
I believe he may have been going to visit Evan Simon, the one quarterback commitment.
Oh, all right. Interesting.
At home, okay. Yeah. And I think, too, is like, yes, like everyone says, I know that was one of the various, kind of like shots people tried to take at Schiano when they tried to derail him or malign his candidacy. I think it's a good thing for recruits in the trickle-down effect that, yes, it might be older people who remember what he did here first, but if all those people are fired up and their butts are in the stadium and they're making noise and they're donating money, that helps recruit too.
Very true. Very true. Is he good? This is another question from this is a better one for Todrick, but the name Jalen Berger, Don Bosco, is he going to be able to get one of these kids to flip? I mean, I just can't imagine this late in the process a guy who, is, I guess, Wisconsin is tops on his list, or Penn State, Michigan. I see everybody. Is that going to be anything that I know he recruited them at Ohio State, but can he change a guy like that to set the narrative, Kratz, you think, or is that going to be a hard sell at this point?
I mean, I don't think it's a definite. I know when Greg got hired, some of the recruiting predictions, people just flipped it to Rutgers automatically. Yeah. I don't think that's the case, but I think the good thing is with Berger is he's indicated throughout the process that he was thinking about kind of signing to a school, but keeping it quiet and then announcing his commitment at, I think, the All-American Bowl, which I think is in San Antonio, like January 4th, I believe.
Yeah.
So if he's planning to take his time or like not make his announcement until the new year, I think that helps Greg, because that means Greg's got a month to work on the kid as opposed to 2 weeks.
Right.
So if he stays on that kind of path and plan, I think that's a good thing I think the longer this goes, the better of a chance Greg has. But you know what? I mean, it would definitely be a splash, but at the same time, can you fault a Jersey running back from wanting to go to Wisconsin, given what Jonathan Taylor, Corey Clement and Ron Dane have done?
He was out there for a visit. The good Taylor had 30 carries, 250. Yeah. I mean, that's tough too. That's tough to compete with, obviously. All right, another question. This is an interesting one, and I think would it be a huge statement to just dump Raheem Blackshear? It's interesting because I think a lot of people are angry about him taking the red shirt, kind of as a captain, not abandoning the team, but making a decision for himself. Sarge, do you think that Blackshear would be back? And would it be a statement to the fan base? I mean, it's tough to give up on talent like that, and you don't want to insult young people either. What do you think?
It's a great question. And that's the reason why you hit the nail on the head as far as having this insider services. Questions like that you don't even think about, and you just remember like how Nunzio in that press conference was so down on Raheem Blackshear. What do we know? I mean, we're not speculating on stuff. What do we know for a fact? We know that Greg Schiano has an enormous amount of respect for Nunzio. He's keeping him on staff right now, and Nunzio is clearly out there recruiting. If he's leaning on him for counsel, on advice, what the last 3 months have been like inside the program, I think those public statements are probably how Nunzio feels, that Blackshear abandoned the team at that point. And look, running back, we do know at that position, Isaiah Pacheco is one of the more talented guys on the roster. He showed it against Penn State. They have Aaron Young, who shows the promise, and I think that's a position where you probably get some talented players, whether it's the transfer portal or recruits. You mentioned Jalen Berger as well. You could probably get more talented running backs than any other position. So it would be a statement. Again, I hate speculating on anything, and Greg Schiano did say that he's talking to everybody when the Blackshear question was presented, but he didn't mention Raheem specifically. He just said, I'm talking to everybody right now. It would be a statement, and I could absolutely see that would be one way where Rutgers can go.
Related, are they in serious danger of losing anybody else?
So far, there's been no indications. Yeah. Obviously, Isaiah Pacheco told us at Penn State after the game he's not going. Tyshawn Fogg said he's not going. Here's the thing: Rutgers fans don't want to hear it, but look at the roster. Write down a list of the guys you feel you cannot lose at all.
Yeah, well, Avery Young.
It's not a terribly long list. Every indication are that Aaron and Avery Young are on board. Mike Turdoff's not going anywhere. We know that. Yeah. Ellen Loomer, I don't think is going. And, Mike Maietti, these are Jersey kids who probably are ecstatic to play for Greg Schiano. And then when you go beyond that, there's just not – there were not a lot of – there's just not a lot of guys on this roster that if they would enter the transfer portal, you would go, this is a devastating blow to Rutgers.
Right. All right, here's another good one that had not come up. Is Kenny Parker coming back, the strength coach? And that's a good one because early when Chris Ash was first hired, it was just made a big deal about Kenny Parker coming from Ohio State, bringing his, the strength strategy, the whole, this was going to be how they're going to build players and develop players. And it never happened. Obviously, that has a lot to do with the talent, but also, as Greg Schiano pointed out, they developed some 2-star players and 10 NFL prospects. So is he coming back? You guys know?
We don't know.
He's still listed on the on the team website as being the strength coach. I will say, obviously, it's December. Season just ended. You're about to go on break. The off-season program's not going to start until they get back in January. So there's some time. I think, obviously, the minute Greg got hired, even before then, people were saying, is Jay Butler coming back? Is Jay Butler coming back? I talked to someone who said, Jay's got a pretty good job at IMG, doesn't know what, but I just think that my guess is they could go one of two ways. My instinct would be that, the strength coach is so important to a head football coach that Greg is going to want his guy, whether it would be Jay Butler or someone else he's met. But the other hand, and that's it's comparing apples to oranges, but when Pat Shurmur got hired by the Giants, he kept Ben McAdoo's entire strength and conditioning team because his thing was, they're good at their jobs. They're well regarded, well respected. Why would I change anything? So I don't think it's a definite that they're going to do a change. I just would say my guess is that by the time second semester starts, my guess is you might have a new strength coach in place.
That could be one of those areas where Greg's past experience, whether the Patriots or the Ohio State or wherever he's been, along the line on these coaching tours, that could be one of those places where someone we don't even know that Greg has been impressed with that he tries to hire.
Right. All right, let's dive. Let's dive into this because it's a good transition to the next segment about basketball. Do you guys think Steve Pikiell is still a year away due to such a young team and 4 sophomores starting? Basketball team dropped the last game at kind of a ugly slugfest there at Pittsburgh. Tough place to win, but certainly not a great Pittsburgh team. They're 6-2. And that now comes the buzzsaw. First they play at Michigan State, 11th ranked Michigan State national title contender, come home a couple of days later, Wisconsin, always good. And then the Garden State Hardwood Classic, December 14th, against Seton Hall. Kratz, from what you've seen, is it the conclusion already that we just think this team's a year away?
I think so. Yeah. They haven't been. I have not looked at them this year so far and said, okay, this team's going to the NIT. They could still turn it around, but I just think this is probably going to be a year where I think Brian Fonseca, our intrepid colleague, said it best. In hindsight, if this team can go 500, that's a really good accomplishment for them.
Yeah.
As for a year away, I mean, you can say that, but here's the thing too, like the recruiting is not, as I said, I think a couple of podcasts ago, you got to reserve all judgment until Cliff Amarui goes somewhere else because they've been kind of really all in on him. But the recruiting hasn't knocked your socks off, and I think it's going to be interesting. I think hiring Schiano definitely helps Peichel take a little bit of the pressure off, but Michigan State's going to be angry because they just got blown up by Duke. So I think there's a good chance they're going to run Rutgers out of Breslin on Sunday. And then if you lose to Wisconsin at home, Wisconsin's kind of been up and down this year. I think that's when you're really going to start to have the fan base panic.
Yeah, Sarge, do you agree that is it right to panic? I mean, I guess I'm not surprised. I understand that people are excited, but you have a lot of young pieces. You still don't really have a star on this team like you had in the past. You don't have a guy who can just shoot you out of a slump. I think that's what you're seeing a lot of times. These guys different guys jacking up threes and they don't go in. Well, that's what's going to happen. I mean, what's your sense?
Yeah, I do think that they do improve. Steve Peichel teams do improve as the season goes along, so I wouldn't write them off just yet. But I also agree with Kratch. I mean, there's not a lot of go-to guys where this is the guy 4 minutes left in the game, kind of like what Corey Sanders was a few years ago. Maybe Montez Mathis turns into that. Maybe Geo Baker. He's hit some clutch shots in the past. Maybe he becomes the alpha dog, but they don't have those that surefire guy. And again, I think in interior, once again in the Big Ten play, I think their front court, weakness is probably going to be exposed a little bit. I will say, conversely, the rack is, you're looking at. I was looking at some of the schedule and the Wisconsin game, only 500 and something tickets remain. Seton Hall game is obviously going to be sold out. So maybe, as they start to get some home cooking, in some of these bigger games, the rack, becomes more of a factor. I wouldn't write them off just yet, but I think Fonseca's right. I think Kratch is right. I think 500 would be a big accomplishment right now.
And go ahead.
I would just say, to piggyback what Sarge said at the front court, Miles Johnson stayed out of foul trouble and had a brilliant game at Pitt, and they still lost by 11. They can't squander big-time games from Miles Johnson. I think he's the key to this whole thing. If he's not in foul trouble and he's pulling down a double-double and really giving you great minutes, you got to win those games.
Stealing that game against Seton Hall, especially with Seton Hall's expectations this year, would certainly change the narrative of the season. I think for Peichel now, that gives you some wiggle room. It makes up for the St. Bonaventure loss. Now all of a sudden people are thinking, all right, well maybe this team can go somewhere. And then you've got, going back to the schedule, Lafayette, Caldwell, Nebraska, Penn State, Illinois. I mean, it's a stretch where you can. I mean, if the team starts to play well, you can go on a winning streak there, and all of a sudden, all right, maybe the NIT is not impossible. But yeah, as to your point, Kratch, and I haven't watched a lot of it, but what I have watched, they're not passing the eye test so far. That's kind of what I come away with. All right, there's our basketball segment, so now people can get off our case about it. We're talking basketball, Dave. Okay. We really are we should just call people up and just talk our podcast on the phone with our audience. Let's talk wrestling. Anything else? What do we got? Women's basketball, Kratch? You're the anything else guy here when we start going into the what?
Phil Murphy will be at the women's basketball game on Thursday.
Right. Wow.
He will be.
Huh.
Yes, women's basketball playing well. Aurel Garantes was Big Ten Player of the Week the second time this year. They're making moves. I think they lost to LSU. Their one loss was at LSU. That they won some Power 5 games down in the Bahamas. So I think they're still need a little bit more. I think in terms to kind of really get on the full national radar. They're getting a couple votes in the AP Top 25. Wrestling opens up against Maryland Saturday night at the Rack. Should be a pretty good crowd. Maryland's not a terribly strong program, so Rutgers should kind of win the dual meet easily. I'm going to be talking about an hour or so with Scott Goodale, get an update. I think Rutgers is going to be pretty healthy, have its full lineup there if they need those guys. If the dual meet is kind of a little bit closer than they expect, but they should get off on a good foot, and then that's basically it for wrestling. I mean, they're done for the rest of the semester. And then the big focus becomes, I'm sure we'll discuss in our podcast to come, Anthony Ashnell, Nick Soriano going to go to the U.S. Open right around Christmas in Fort Worth, try to make that push to qualify for Olympic trials. And then the big question becomes, is Nick going to come back for the second semester? And that's still up in the air.
You mentioned Phil Murphy, and this would be something we forgot to talk about earlier, and then we'll sign off. But if you're making a list of like the 5 winners in this thing, like coming down, you got to put Phil Murphy's name on this list. And I thought he clearly, to everyone said behind the scenes, he had pulled some strings. He got involved where he might not have wanted to get involved or didn't know he had to get involved. He did get involved. He made the commitment clear, and having him at the press conference too, to make that statement about New Jersey being behind the team. I don't know. I thought it added something to it. Now you're like, all right, you've got the coach, you got the money, you're going to have the facility. Now you got the governor. He came out. He's one of the winners in this thing. Sarge, you agree?
Oh, totally agree. And our reporting indicates that the chair of the board of governors, who we hardly ever mention, Mark Engelson, is very close, and I think that might have been the one of the connections that kind of got Phil Murphy to be involved. We talked about this last week. I think Greg Schiano, going back to early in his tenure, has always wanted the New Jersey governor to be involved, and if you remember, Corzine traveled to Texas for the Texas Bowl in 2006. Governor Cody, State Senator Cody, was a free traveler to all the bowl games. So Greg Schiano does like that political influence. He does like having the governor involved, and he gave him a big shout out during the press conference.
Craig Brown. Jim from accounting. I know Greg Brown's a fan of the podcast. He doesn't really listen to this. I do not believe that. But when he sees Jim from accounting at the, doing, hey, what happened to Rutgers?
Jim's fired, by the way. He's not going to see Jim
from accounting. Can say to Greg Brown, good. You got your coach. Good job, Rutgers. This is good. He had a good day. He was smiling and shaking hands. And I think that, he deserved to take a bow too. So we give him that. That he shifted quickly.
Well, and the story, and I'm glad that Greg Schiano mentioned it. Like, in 2005, we mentioned it last week on the podcast. 2005, the Insight Bowl, the first bowl game. That's when Greg Brown was brought to the, brought into the tent, so to speak. We've actually talked to Greg Brown on a podcast a few years ago where he said the reason why he is involved, and he gives money not just to athletics but to a lot of other causes throughout Rutgers. But the reason why he's involved was because of Greg Schiano. And now 14 years later, he's the one who when you're crediting people, whether it's Pat Hobbs or the board of governors, but I mean Greg Brown certainly is. You can count on one hand how many people had bigger influence and probably leave a couple fingers. Take a couple fingers away. So he was that influential. Good for him.
All right. That's all I've got. You guys got anything else? Can we sign off? Sign off.
We can sign off.
Thanks for listening. It's been a crazy 2 months. I'm glad it's over. We're all going to go away for a couple of days. Leave us alone. Thanks for listening. Take it easy. Bye-bye.